things theology, all things theology. We chop it up properly, without an apology. Gotta give doxology to God, hollow be, cause this is how we do it at All Things Theology.
All right.
Good to have you.
Brother, good to be with you. Yeah, it's an honor to come on your program. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Absolutely. So let's get it right into it. I know you grew up in kind of word of faith theology, kind of had that background. I myself grew up in that, and man, I'm sure we can go on stories about stuff we experienced. Tell me about kind of the upbringing in word of faith and kind of how you kind of got out of that.
Yeah, sure, brother. So, I was raised reared in a Southern Baptist church. Was born into a Southern Baptist church. So, on paper, we were not Word of Faith at all,
Right.
Southern Baptist. But there was a family in the church, one man in particular named Charlie, and Charlie was very much Word of Faith. Even though at the time I didn't know there was such a thing as Word of Faith, I'd never even heard of it. But Charlie was one who was following, Benny Hinn and Kenneth Hagin at the time. Hinn was just becoming a blip on the radar back then, but Hagin and Copeland he was big into, and so he lived right down the street from my parents where I was reared. And Charlie came up to me one day and he said, "Justin, God has spoken to me, and he's told me that he's going to heal you. As long as you have enough faith." And so I was 16 years old at the time. And at that age, I wanted to be healed. I wanted to run, play sports, play football, do all the things that my friends are doing, drive, which, I can now, but at the time I didn't think I would ever be able to drive. So I really latched onto it. He told me about a woman named Nora Lam, Lam, who was a Chinese woman. And she wrote a book entitled China Cry, in which she detailed how God supposedly delivered her out of communist China back in the 60s. And a very dramatic tale of her escape. She says she escaped a firing squad. She said that she carried her firstborn child in her womb for 12 months. 12 months, just so she could get out of communist China before she had the baby. And so I found out years later that pretty much everything she told about herself was made up, just a lie, which is typical in this movement. But and I didn't know any of that at the time, of course. And Charlie was, he's always getting a dream, always getting a vision. He's one of these people that God seemed to talk to more than he ever did to Moses. He's just one of these guys. And I didn't know anything about hermeneutics, and so he would have me down to his house, and he would show me verses like Isaiah 53, 4 and 5, by his stripes we are healed, and he healed them all, and 3 John 2, beloved, I pray that in all things you may prosper and be in good health, even as your soul prospers. And of course he was, and I don't even know if he knows or he knew. I don't know if he knew he was taking these verses out of context, but I understand now that's what he was doing. But I was completely convinced that I was going to be healed. And so Nora Lamb was having a miracle crusade there in Vicksburg, Mississippi, my hometown. And I went there fully expecting to be healed. And of course I wasn't. She made a big push for money. And she said, the more money you give to the Lord's work, the more likely it is he will answer your prayers. She actually told that specifically to my father when he questioned her why she wouldn't come up. She would go up to other sick people, well, quote unquote sick people, people who had something wrong with them that you couldn't readily see, ringing in your ears, bad back, shoulder pain, that kind of stuff, conditions that you can't really see.
Right.
But she wouldn't come anywhere near me. Or my friend who was there with me, who also had cerebral palsy. So she wouldn't come anywhere near us. But she did tell my dad, the more money you give to the Lord's work, the more likely it is he'll answer your prayers. She was trying to get money out of him. Not that we were wealthy or anything, but so that was my first exposure to it. And I went to see some other faith healers in hopes of being healed. So even though we weren't Word of Faith, there was, and the sad thing, Chris, is that nobody nobody in my church at the time, a Southern Baptist church, nobody had enough theological wherewithal to pull me aside and say, well, nobody had enough theological wherewithal to take Charlie, who was a man in his 50s at the time, and say, Charlie, your theology is wrong. This is not what we believe. You're deceiving, Justin. And nobody had enough theological wherewithal to do that, or to come to me and say, Justin, this is not biblical. Faith healers aren't biblical. This is not of God. This is, and so anyway, but years later in my 20s, I enrolled in seminary. I went to Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary in Fort Worth, Texas. And by that time, I had figured out that it was not biblical, but I had an interest in it, and I began to study this movement at a more academic level. And long story short, I ended up writing my master's thesis on Benny Hinn and the Word of Faith movement for my Master of Theology program. And so as part of the research for that, this was in Fort Worth, and from time to time, Benny Hinn would come to DFW and have a big crusade. And so this was 2001, 2002, and he was at that time, he was kind of at the zenith of his popularity. He's a shadow of what he was back then today. But I went to see some crusades. Interestingly, Costi Hinn, Benny Hinn's nephew, who's now delivered out of that stuff. But at the time, he was a catcher for his uncle. He would catch people. And we figured out a few years ago that he and I were at some of the same Benny Hinn crusades together, just on opposite ends of the theological spectrum. So, so I wrote my master's thesis on Benny Hinn and did a deep dive on that. And then a church in Alabama in 2004 heard of my research, and they invited me in to speak on the Word of Faith movement at their church. And this was October of 2004, and that was the first time I did kind of the early version of what I now call Clouds Without Water. And honestly, ever since then, brother, it is just it's taken me all over the world. And I've taught on this in 30 different countries now.
Wow. Yo, guys, thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed what you heard here today, why don't you go and leave me a like? Subscribe to the channel if it's your first time here. Hit that notification bell. I promise to give you weekly content, lives, interacting, exposing false teachers, showing you my theological beliefs and what I believe the Bible teaches. So if you're here for that, go and join us.